I think for sure we need a national conversation about long-term care, long-term health, how we as a nation are going to take care of our boomers, of our aging parents, of ourselves.
I was surprised to find what is actually not covered in your health care and in your insurance. And having somebody, if you are laid up and you need to be dressed, you need to be fed, you need somebody to drive you to errands. That kind of stuff is not covered, and that's what we're talking about. And that can happen to you at any age.
Yeah, so all the research shows that 70% of people over 65 will actually need some form of long-term care.
Right.
People are always shocked about what's not covered, right? In
Yes.
everything.
Right.
When it comes to your home insurance or when it comes to your health insurance or when it comes to long-term care, people usually find that out
After the fact.
when they come in and they think, well, I need this. And they're like, that's not covered. That's not covered. And they're like, oh my gosh, nobody told me.
Right.
I hear that over and over again. Nobody told me it would be like this.
Well, because we're all living longer, and most people who end up needing long-term care need it for an average of 3 years. 3 years is a long time. That can be so unbelievably catastrophic economically to families.
People think, oh, there will be a doctor there and he or she will tell me what to do.
Right.
Or somebody will help me navigate this. And I think what we're learning also every day is that people put aside money 10 years ago that they thought would carry them for their lifetime, and they're finding out that's not enough. The American family has changed so dramatically in the last 20 or 30 years. Only 1/5 of American families have a stay-at-home parent. So you've got two people working who have to juggle jobs if they want to take care of a parent.
I really couldn't think of anybody who, first of all, who's had this kind of experience on so many different levels and so recently in their life. I mean, I've watched you over the past 5 years really, really have to step up for your family.
My parents ended up needing help almost simultaneously. My mother broke her hip, then she had strokes, and one thing after the other. At the same time, my dad got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so they needed different types of caregivers. They needed different things from my brothers and myself. I was trying to balance my own children, my own family. I was doing it long distance. I was doing it in my home, and it was wrenching. Some of the things we take so much for granted, I used to watch my parents struggle with. Getting dressed in the morning. When my dad couldn't drive anymore and he needed to go to church every day, who was going to take care of him? Who was going to drive him there? And I've seen so many people have to leave their job because they can't afford someone to come in. They have to, move.
Yeah, and my parents, my father is in Ohio. I'm in California. So I would, if he really, really, really needed it, I would be in Ohio. I mean, that's a huge geographic issue.
So you haven't sat down with your dad and said, look, let's have the talk. Let's talk about your long-term care, what you want, what I think you might need. You haven't done that.
I have, and here's what I've learned. Like anything else, is there's no perfect way to do anything. You just have to start it, and even if it doesn't go as you want it to go, you've put it in the air and you try it again and you try it again. And if the last third of your life is as important as the first third or the second third, and yet it's the one part of our lives that we don't like to plan for and we don't like to talk about. And why should it be any different than the rest of your life?
But most people want to have that conversation when somebody's had a stroke, when somebody's become incapacitated. They wait. We're a nation of people in denial.
Right.
Someone can get diagnosed with Alzheimer's, someone can get a stroke, and all of a sudden you're in the thick of it and you've made no plans.
Right.
And you can go from being pretty well off to really struggling in a couple of months if you have no plan. So I think the really smart thing is when you're healthy, when you have a job, when you have the ability to make savings, when you have the ability to actually sit down and think about what does long-term care actually look like? What does it sound like? What does it cost? What does it mean? And because it's always something we think someone else needs, as
Right
opposed
up
to
till the minute we
something
need it
till we
ourselves.
need it, and then we're scrambling. So I think it's a really good thing to do when you feel young and vital, and when you come back in from surfing, and you're like looking in the mirror, and you're like, hot. Okay, let's go down and have a long-term care talk because I look so good.
And it's that old great truism that the best time to prepare your roof is when the sun is shining. I talk to my kids all the time about taking ownership of their lives. The sense that you're waiting for events to react to is never a good idea. Everything is about your perspective, right? And how you see it. And I think there's a sense amongst people that talking about the kind of things that we've been talking about is an acknowledgement of mortality. It's an acknowledgement of decline. It's an acknowledgement of helplessness, fearfulness, and the unknown. That may be true. But on the other side of it, I think if you look at it as taking control of your future and designing the life you want to live, nobody would have a problem with that. Most people have been doing that their whole lives. But for some reason they stop when it comes to this part. And I think if they just look at it as just continuing organically what they've already been doing, I think it'll be easier for people.
How are we going to change the igniting of that conversation, the igniting of that talk? How are we going to plan in a way that our parents didn't?
I say sneak attack is the best. You catch them completely unaware. They're living it. So they're open to having it, but their fear in bringing it up and instigating it with us is all about being a burden, and their fear around that.
Okay, so what is the answer to the talk that we all need to have? It's really about educating yourself. We've talked about being smart, getting the tools, and also you can do it in an inspiring way.
Yes.
I always say, like, information, inspiration, ignite action, and that's how you make an impact.